Welcome to the British Chamber of Commerce Singapore's podcast channel. We're excited to bring you Season 3 of new episodes featuring in-depth content across Singapore, ASEAN and the United Kingdom. We've had some extraordinary guests on our channel, including Formula One's Claire Williams.
I'm a firm believer that any great team, any successful team has a great culture flowing through it. You aren't successful if you don't. So we put a lot of work into this.
Renowned mountaineer Kenton Cool.
That 2019 there with a client, a big storm came in and literally destroyed Camp 2. And I've got some video footage of Sherpas like trying to hold on to the tent fabric as it blows away. And
the Royal Navy's Commodore Steve Morehouse, commander of the UK Carrier Strike Group.
The squadron of F-35 aircraft we have on board is a Royal Air Force squadron, and the personnel there are drawn from both the Navy and the Air Force. So, what better way of showing just the efficiency and the joined-up nature that we now have.
And distinguished Sky News anchor Jeremy Thompson.
We had two little vans with satellite links, and we leapfrogged up the road to Pristina, the capital, throughout that first day, with non-stop coverage from basically inside a war zone.
We also sit down with the likes of TikTok, Twitch and Twitter and continue to bring you conversations around business and trade, leadership and people, sustainability, sports and arts and much, much more. Thank you, as always, for your support and we hope you enjoy this podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Graham. I'm the Senior Partner Manager for Globalisation Partners. We are a global employer of record, and I am moderating our second episode of the Future of Work podcast with Vidya Santhanam, the co-founder and CEO of Fitbots, which is an OKR management software and coaching platform, as well as Rob Squires, the Vice President and Head of Sales at APJ of Ceridian, a US human capital management firm. Rob and Vidya, welcome back again. Thank you again for your participation in the first episode, but really for giving those insights to both structure, form, and the two halves which must work for HR to continue to be successful during the pandemic, namely the organization and the employees, which sounds obvious, but which has so many more tweaks than we never envisioned we might have to actually implement compared to before the pandemic. Almost goes without saying. But I set this up because in the previous episode, we were talking about general employee engagement and how things have had to change from a general HR principles perspective, HR management perspective, but also in the rising importance of human capital management software in either accelerating or maybe even just fixing the problem of what might be a lack of engagement if we look at the flip side of that coin with a workforce now. Even now in 2022, when people are progressively going back to the office or remaining hybrid, which is another can of worms to discuss in itself. But shifting back to the question of retention, we have had, the great resignation, which is probably old news by now, but we're not seeing that same sort of predictable familiarity with how we might be able to have people stay on in our companies, say compared to before the pandemic. Right now, it seems to be that the number one question on every employer's mind is how do I keep these individuals that I've worked so hard to employ to stay with me? And does that have to do with the inherent volatility of just hiring during a pandemic? Am I just not ever going to get people to stay in my organization because I hired them during the pandemic? Or is it more to do with the organization or the software? The question that I can try to phrase to both of you is, how would we be able to keep employees retained, positively engaged with us? And is there anything that we can do from either a principles or a software technology perspective to improve the situation?
In context to this entire conversation around the Great Resignation, as well as retention, as we all know, both engagement as well as people churn or attrition is a lag indicator. It's an outcome of many lead indicators which probably could be controlled a lot sooner before we start measuring the lag. So fundamentally, when teams or employers are looking at it, I think one of the shifts that we are seeing is, hey, how do you focus more on the lead than on lag? I'll give an example, drawing a correlation to new customer onboarding or product experience. So let's say in a business scenario, we say, okay, there's customer churn, but probably there's customer churn because week one of onboarding or user onboarding onto the product has actually fallen from X to Y minutes. So it's very similar from a people perspective itself, where if you find that there are those micro moments, as Janelle rightly called out in the previous episode, where micro moments, there are metrics which can be measured a lot sooner. So for instance, what's the engagement of the team members on the role? And if people are less engaged, let's say on a role or to their customer, to their managers, then you would most likely see that that's an indicator of churn. So the point I'm trying to make is that when we're actually looking at data to make some of these decisions, look at the lead indicators than only the lag indicators. That's one observation that we've had. The second is to actually draw out that entire people experience map. And this is not something which is new to us in the HR community. We've been doing it for many, many years, as to what are those different moments of truth, especially in a hybrid world. And those can change significantly today, as to where a person gets engaged and disengaged and have experiences built around it. So for instance, if it's onboarding or upskilling or learning, or let's say connections with others within the organization, what kind of experience can we build over it? I just want to add to this with a data point before I hand it over to Rob for his thoughts. Is Pew Research actually conducted a study, and one of the low scoring variables in that study was connections to co-workers. So this is coming out as one of those big cries, say that if connections to co-workers and friends at work, if that variable can be strengthened, then probably that's a great lead indicator to actually somebody staying on. Rob, what do you think?
Well, great points again, Vidya, and just to complement what you said, look, we're definitely experiencing a historic shift in the relationship between employees and employers. Employees are now in the driver's seat in this area of the Great Resignation, or indeed the Great Reshuffle, where during COVID, employees have not only necessarily left their employer, but they've actually left their industry to find work in an industry that offers more job security moving forward. So not only is it difficult to retain, the retention challenge even leads into the ability to attract new talent into the business if the employee or the talent pool available has reduced as a result of the Great Reshuffle. Look, in today's competitive labour market, every organisation needs to evolve to better support their people by investing more time, energy and budget into building experience that employees will love and that will engage with. We, as an organisation, ran a survey recently across our customer base called The Pulse of Talent. We basically interviewed 6,000 employees from across different organisations across the globe in a multitude of various questions in relation to the health of them today and their relationship with their employer and their current thoughts on their career. Asia was quite significantly represented in that survey, and the whole survey is available on our website for anyone that would like to have a look at it. It's very good reading. Our poll clearly showed that employees have a higher expectation of their employees, of employers, than ever before. In this hyper-competitive labour market, having a modern, technology-driven employee experience will be essential to meet employee expectations and outpace the competition in the race for top talent. Again, it's a really good read for any CHRO and is freely available on our website. Here's a few additional insights from that report that really does relate to this challenge of retention. Prioritising improving employee wellness has been seen to be a very big demand of employees today. We surveyed what employees would like their organisations to do to support mental health and wellness The top 3 answers were mental health days, flexible scheduling and workloads, and additional benefits coverage. And most importantly, we can't compromise culture. The more we fine-tune our systems and our technologies that we use, it'll be easier for the organisation to achieve its goals and grow despite the challenges of a split workforce. We also found that about 33% of the people surveyed indicated a current burnout and that they are less focused at work. So burnout is a real problem today. So promoting productivity and well-being with frequent communication between team members, clear due dates, and identifiable project tasks is really important. And we need to rethink our organisational systems to be able to help support that. As an example, we need to consider hybrid work schedules to optimise time and attendance scheduling. I'll just share with you a few ways, a bit more granular level, how technology can help make a significant contribution to the retention strategy. Firstly, develop your people. Create goals that can be cascaded from the organisational manager level to the employees, whilst empowering employees to create their own goals and align them to organisational or team goals. Also, provide continuous feedback and coaching with two-way conversations to help employees realise career goals and create development plans so employees can envision a future with the organisation. And again, there are technologies and business processes within HR systems today to be able to enable that. But we can't avoid not being prepared for turnover. We need to heavily leverage succession planning to recognise your employees' goals and career aspirations and support their ongoing development and success. We need to continuously identify top performance via meaningful insights to highlight flight risk and create a plan to retain them. And we need to reduce what we call our regrettable turnover. By planning for an employee's future at your company, ensuring they have what they need to succeed. That's a very important point. And back to what we discussed in the first episode of this podcast, systems really need to provide very meaningful indicators and insights to managers today to be able to identify trends within the workforce and be able to react to those trends a lot quicker. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are now starting to play an ever increasingly important role in this predictive analysis that managers need today. But the AI and ML needs to be very well aligned into the right insights and outcomes that managers are looking for. And again, it's something that we as an organisation have spent a lot of time and effort in embracing to better enable our employees. So hopefully they can be seen to be actionable insights that our listeners can take on board to certainly improve their own abilities to retain talent and attract new talent.
Thank you, Rob. There were quite a few points that both of you touched on. One that was common to both of you was the idea of indicators. And Vidya talked about having to focus on leading indicators rather than lagging indicators in terms of the retention question. Rob, you talked about regrettable turnover as well, and using software to facilitate a talent development strategy as one way to invest in employees as a means to not just reduce retention, but to actually improve the engagement of our employees as well. The question that I'd like to ask to Rob first is, what would you define as regrettable turnover?
Well, it's a good question. And really regrettable turnover is where we have very key performers in the business where we just didn't really recognise the true contribution that they make to the business, and to take actions to make sure that they're well embedded with the business and really understand that they have a strong career path. I'll give you an example. We should understand what I would call the pattern of an employee, we can look at things like LinkedIn and so forth to understand somewhat of the history and the behaviour of an employee. If we see an employee has typically changed their employer on average every 3 years, then we need to know that 2.5 years into their tenure with us, we need to really be talking to them about their next phase of growth with the organisation. If we're not having that discussion with them, based on their pattern, they're probably having that discussion with someone else today. So again, it comes back to leveraging meaningful insights and indicators to make sure that we're focusing on particularly the very, very significant contributors to the business. As we all know, key players, key performers, when they leave, they have a very serious impact on the business, and it's not necessarily easy to replace them in a short period of time. So that's just an example of that particular scenario.
Thank you, Rob. That makes a lot of sense. And Vidya, I'm curious as well, based on what Rob said, these regrettable turnover factors, one of which includes the fact that, there are just some resumes out there that you look at where inherently they're just going to be, when I used to be a headhunter, we had this colloquialism, we called them jumpy. Every 1 year they're switching a job, for example. I'm wondering from your perspective, particularly with coaching, is that something that would be naively categorized as merely a generation thing with Generation Z, or is this something that just happens to impact every demographic of the workforce, just because it seems that everyone's had realignments of career expectations generally, just because I went through this pandemic and realized that I might not want to do FP&A for the rest of my life. I might not want to sell insurance for the rest of my life, to give random examples. How do you feel about that, Vidya? And Rob, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, so the way we look at hiring today is, let's say somebody is a gig worker or somebody who's freelancing, and it's of course gone to multiple projects. That's something which is very akin to how they would like to engage with an employer. But if there's a resume out there where, as they say, a rolling stone gathers more moss or no moss, for us, rolling stones would typically, if they've done it with another employer, maybe most likely exactly what Rob said, there's a high possibility of them churning within a year or so. So in our lens, we watch out for such candidates who don't stay with an organization too long, especially when they've got into roles where there is that full-time or permanent employment. Having said that, to your question on regrettable losses of people, the way we like to look at it is tomorrow if I start up again, and if I want to take that team along with me and that person leaves, I'll be sitting and crying. So that's a regrettable loss for me. So really the team members who are moving the needle and moving that business forward, those people already because they're doing it day in and day out. So it's very, very visible. So that's how I'd like to classify regrettable loss of team members from the company.
Thanks, Vidya. And Rob, the comments I made about generational divides as regards how that impacts retention seems to be the case. There's been at least some literature and some articles produced that there's a certain way that one must deal with Generation Z vis-a-vis my generation, the millennials, or vis-a-vis Generation X, the 40-year-olds and above. Do you think that the pandemic has made that divide worse, or was there even a divide to begin with? If we were to try to figure out a way to retain talent by looking at, say, the younger workforce versus someone who is got more years under their belt from a management perspective, is there anything that can be done to customize engagement with them to improve retention, either from a software or high-level HR principles perspective? And this is an open question that Rob can answer first, but you can certainly answer as well, Vidya.
Graham, it's a really good question, and if I refer back to the Pulse of Talent survey that I noted before, this issue and the Great Migration really does span all of that. I guess the age brackets and experience levels of our employee communities. But you certainly touched on a point in that certainly the younger generations in the workforce do have quite new expectations and demands from their employers, particularly those that have, grown up and educated through the world of social media, for instance. And when we look at what the pandemic has done in driving us all to work from home, the blend between communication of how we communicate privately and with our work, they've started to come together. So good HR companies will think about, how do I provide a communication vehicle with my employees that is more like the social experience that they have? How can we make communication with them more collaborative, more tuned to the specific topics of interest that they like to track? And it's certainly an area that we have focused on a lot as a company in our concept called Dayforce Hub, which really gives almost like a social media type interaction between the organisation and the employee, both from an organisational perspective as well as the areas of their specific contribution to the business. So the long answer to your question is yes, we do need to think about generational requirements, and certainly the younger generation has a lot more higher expectations, I think, of the business and how they're embraced and how the business wraps itself around them than maybe some of the older generations that are in the market.
Thank you, Rob. How do you feel about that video?
Here's where I wanted to bring back the point around coaching, where instead of directing, the generation which is just getting into the workforce, because they're very well informed today, there's so much of information democratization that they have access to the same knowledge which, let's say, a leader or a functional expert would have access to. But it's really about coaching them and having more broader exploratory questions where you would want them to go and explore on their own, learn, come back, rather than directing them and telling them what to do. So fundamentally, I think the shift has been in the style of leadership and management in order to manage the younger generation. I have a 11-year-old, and I think it's the same with our kids as well, where they probably would even want to be coached rather than be told exactly what to do, because they're so well informed. So I think the same goes to an employee in a company as well.
Thank you, Vidya. The last question I have for the episode is, now that we are slowly returning to physical offices, maybe not entirely 100%, but perhaps in a hybrid setting, that means that we have to readjust things all over again. The question is, would HR technology be of reduced importance as compared to before the pandemic? Or can we say that the argument for continuing to rely upon it in a way that isn't so much a matter of pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, but just adjusting it for a workforce that's come to be deeply reliant on technological infrastructure augmented by human interaction? Whether we now have to tune things up once again, or would it be more naive to think that the problems that have been described with retention and engagement will be maybe more easily addressed now that we have a higher chance of getting back to those micro moment water cooler experiences with at least maybe 1 or 2 days in the office? Is there now an easier situation that we might have now compared to when we were only ever stuck in our homes doing work? For either of you to answer?
It's another good question, Graham. Look, our experience across our customer base says that the world of work has changed, and it was already changing, but COVID certainly accelerated the process, and that the world of work will stay changed. We are in a new era of work that is hybrid, that is borderless, it's fluid, and that's not going to change. So all of the challenges that we've spoken to over this series and the podcast before remain there. And as a result, really, as the future of work continues to take shape, having a modern technology-driven employee experience will be paramount. to an organization's ability to continue to attract and retain talent, manage that more dispersed workforce, and respond to potential future workforce disruption. I think if we look at the press recently, we'll certainly see that there is a trend of reluctance to return to the working environment for various reasons, and that trend is being seen across the globe. So really, companies need to be very serious about considering continuity of the hybrid work environment, which comes with all of the challenges that we've spoken about over these two sessions. And to continue just on the theme of, how is technology, HR technology, still relevant as we do start to recover from the COVID scenario? Again, more important than ever, this new borderless workforce also necessitates a higher focus on compliance, for instance, particularly in the areas of pay, time, and benefits. An example, if we are, now looking at leveraging the gig economy, and we may need to be remunerating people in new geographies or jurisdictions, we need to make sure that we're doing so in a very compliant manner, and our HR systems need to provide the framework for us to be able to embrace those new challenges as we move forward. So we see a trend where, good, solid HCM software is ever more important than before. And if we look at market analysis, given these headwinds, it's no surprise that the industry that my organisation is in, the global HCM technology market, is primed for growth. IDC forecasts our market to reach nearly $30 billion by 2025, which represents a compound annual growth rate of around 9%. That's a fairly solid outlook for the importance of our industry to the challenges that CHRO, and again, technology is particularly important.
I would completely second that. I think HR tech is here to stay. The important question to ask is, what did we hire the milkshake to do? As we say it in, the very profound, piece that Clay Christensen had written up. So one of the shifts that we would soon start seeing is they're not actually adopting technology or buying a piece of software, but really what's that big problem that people are going to solve is something that is going to be asked a lot. So for instance, if I take, let's say, an onboarding software, I'm not really taking an onboarding software, I'm trying to create memories for my new employees who are joining, or I'm not really buying an OKR software, but I'm taking something so that it aligns and helps my teams achieve more, or I'm not really buying a payroll software, but I want to give my own employees that amazing experience and a great standard of living. So it's really about how people are going to start buying technology. The technology is here to stay and will continue augmenting that entire experience.
Thank you, Vidya, and thank you, Rob. Now, of course, the question was intentionally provocative in asking two individuals from HR software whether the industry was relevant. But certainly, it's of course goes about saying that we are already dependent and will continue to be dependent on the algorithms that make HR work. But certainly, starting from the principle of why we're buying the software and why we're doing this is always something that I believe will remain top of mind for anyone who's either leading a team or augmenting HR processes for other managers. Thank you very much for your time, Rob and Vidya. I really appreciate your really active and healthy participation in pretty difficult questions that the three of us have been discussing, and previously with Janelle in the first episode. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Our pleasure, Graham. Thank you for having us. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Rob, and wonderful to be here, and great learnings for me as well. Thank you.
My pleasure. You were listening to Rob Squires from Ceridian and Vidya Santhanam from Fitbots, and I'm Graham Lim from Globalisation Partners. Thank you to you out there in the audience for listening to this podcast. Have a great day, and until next time.
thank you for tuning into this episode of the British Chambers Podcast. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, and why not leave us a rating and review on Spotify, Apple, Google, and the other podcast platforms. For more information, please visit our website at www.britcham.org.sg and tune in next time for a brand new episode.